Hi, I'm Bob Mover, and I'd like to welcome you all to our podcast, On the Real Side. And today I'm honored to have, two very honored to have two guests. Um, our subject of today's interview and podcast, Mr. Sam Noto, one of the greatest trumpet players in the history of jazz, who I've had the privilege of playing with and recording with. And uh, Sam has had quite an illustrious history in the music, and we're going to delve into that. And with the help of a great friend of mine, actually sort of a student of mine, now I'm a student of his, uh, a great saxophone player named Kirk MacDonald, who resides in Toronto and has also an illustrious history with Sam of co-leading a quintet together for years. That when I lived in Toronto was one of my favorite things to go down and hear those guys and then play the last set with them was always a really wonderful experience for me to do that. And they made a beautiful record together called The Revelers, which I really enjoyed. And I'm very happy to have Kirk here today to help us help out with this talk we're having with Sam. So thank you guys for showing up and being here, and I'm looking forward to having to talking. Sam, I wanted to just start at the beginning, with your origins. I mean, there are things we never really had a chance to talk about when you're playing together. And in that situation, you really don't sit down and say, well, how did you grow up and where were your parents? And, like, were you from an Italian family on both sides? And was it a musical family? And that kind of idea can just might as well begin at the beginning. Uh, so, Sam, you were in Buffalo? You were born in Buffalo?
Yep, born in 1930.
Uh huh. Right at the Depression.
Right, depression baby.
So did you experience, was your family, I mean, experiencing the economic hardships of the Depression and all that when you were uh, very young?
Yeah, because my dad couldn't speak English too well, so it was hard to him to find a job when there wasn't any jobs, and if they were interested and he couldn't speak English too well, it was harder on him. So and we were in the welfare with the cart and going to get the food and all that, all that hardship stuff. I'm sure a lot of people who are as older than me would remember that.
Well, then, it's a time that, I've read about, and I've met a lot of people your age who told me about that period. But what part of Italy was your dad from?
Pardon?
What part of Italy was your father from?
Oh, Sicily,
Ah, he was Sicilian.
right near Salerno, Gartolazeta, it was called.
Uh-huh. Well, I spent a lot of time in Italy, and the thing with Italians, it was funny that there people in, let's say, in the south near Bari. I was in that area a lot. There are little towns like Giovinazzo and Molfetta, and there are people who have been to Giovinazzo, who live in Giovinazzo, and they never bothered to go to Molfetta, which is like 4 miles away. But they've stayed in their village, and that's what they do. And so I imagine coming from such an insular place as Sicily must have been something for him. Was your mother also, were they together in Italy and came over together to America, or?
No, my mother came when she was 3. My father came with his father when he was 19. So he met, then when he came here to live, his father didn't like it. He went back. So my father went to Birmingham and worked in the steel plants. And that's where my mother's people, who are from the same area in Sicily, ended up. And that's where he met her and married her. In fact, my oldest brother was born in Birmingham, Alabama. And then he moved up to Buffalo. And that's where the rest of us were born.
Oh, and so when did you was it a musical family, or how did you come about music? What was your first instrument, and what gravitated you
Well,
toward music in general?
my oldest brother was a drummer. He was playing the drums. So I used to hang out with him and go to the roller rink and all that. And we listened to the jukebox, and he put all the Harry James and the big band artists at that time. And that's where I started falling in love with the music. And then when I heard the trumpet players, I fell in love with that sound. So when I was 12 in grammar school, they asked if anybody wanted to play an instrument, and I said, I do. And I started playing the trumpet in school. We rented the trumpet for $2 for the whole semester. But that was a hard time getting that $2 to rent it.
Well, $2 is a lot of money then. I
Right,
mean,
right, yeah.
I just I was reading about something in the '70s, and when I made $75 a night, which they're still paying in New York a lot of the time, but 70, I said, gee, I was living okay in the early '70s on 2 nights a week at Sweet Basil for $75 a night. And then my daughter asked me, how much would that be now? And we looked it up, and wow, I was making like almost $300 a night.
Yeah.
It's the $2. So $2 at that time, I can imagine was was pretty steep. And a lot of people came out of Harry James, didn't they? It's very interesting. Like Ira Sullivan told me the same thing. He said before he heard Dizzy and Fats and those guys, he was Harry James was his man, And my dad
Yeah.
was very much into that too. And
Yeah. When I went to buy a new Harry James record, I was about 15. And a friend of mine from school was in the booth listening to records. So he knocked on the window and he opened the door and he says, hey, Sam, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm looking for the new Harry James record. He said, Harry James, haven't you heard of Bird and Diz? I says, who? So he says, come on in there. I went in the booth. I was in there for 4 hours listening to Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and it blew my mind. I mean, that did it. My whole life changed in that 4 hours. They had to throw me out of the store. I didn't buy anything. I didn't have any money.
oh, and that was it, huh? That was
Yeah, that was it. I fell in love with that music, and I ended up knowing those people. And that summit, when I was on that Kenton tour, both Bird and Diz were on that tour, and I was hanging out with them. I heard Bird every night for 3 months, every night.
oh, that must have been something, man. I wish I could have.
Man, it knocked me out, man. I could hardly play the charts behind him. The big band was backing him up. I got so much listening to what he was doing, I'd be stepping on my dick back there,
I imagine, man. I don't see how you could concentrate on anything but what he was doing. It was so strong, right?
Yeah, right.
And I remember once you told me we were asking. I asked you some things about if you got to hang out with him, and you said something about he often tried to borrow money, or
Always. Yeah, we used to gamble a lot on that tour, and he was losing a lot of money. So now I was losing. I had $20. He said, "Hey man, let me have that $20." I said, "Oh man, I'm losing, Bird. I got to try to get my money back." He said, "Oh man," he got salty and left.
you know, Lee Coder told me a story once about that Bird had borrowed $5 from him, and one day he was walking down the street and he saw Charlie about to get on a bus with a friend,
Yeah.
and Lee kind of ran up and he said, Charlie, if you could, that $5 that you borrowed, I'm really like needing it right now. Would you happen to have it to give it back to me? And he said, Lee very graciously said, why, of course, Lee. And then he reached into his buddy's pocket and pulled out the guy's wallet and peeled off $5 from his friend's wallet and gave it to Lee and got on the bus. Yeah. But hearing him every night, and Diz was on the same tour where they were together on this tour.
Huh?
Bird and Diz were together on this tour with Stan Kenton, or was the
They had different spots. Bird played with in front of Kenton's band for 3 numbers or 4 numbers, and Dizzy did the same thing. They didn't play together on the tour, no.
Oh, that's an interesting.
Yeah,
That's
but
interesting.
they
So
used
Sam,
to
what
Yeah,
is that, what, 52 or 53? What, 1953, was it? 52?
I'm
The
sorry,
tour
I
with
can't.
the tour with Kenton, was it 1952, 53? I'm trying to remember. You remember what year that was?
Yeah, and I can't hear you too well, Kirk.
Well, that was Kirk wanted to know what year. I think it was the year of my birth, 1952 or 53.
53 it was.
It was 53, so I was a year old.
53.
Yeah. Was Davy
Yeah.
Schildkraut on that as well?
Yes. Davy Crowd. They had a thing called altoology where they had 4 altos playing. They had Lee Konitz, Dave Schildkraut, Bird, and Charlie Mariano.
No.
But
Oh man, that would be like dying to go to heaven. I mean, that's
we rehearsed it, but we never did it on the show. No.
oh man, nobody they didn't play it and they didn't record it.
Yeah, it was.
Charlie Parker, Charlie Mariano, Konitz, and Schildkraut.
Yeah,
That would have been. I mean, as an alto player, I couldn't have made a better. Oh wait, bye, my sweetheart. My daughter's leaving. I just have to say goodbye to her for a second. Bye. I love you. I'll talk to you tonight. Yeah.
but that
So,
was just great to hear at rehearsal. But I don't know why we just never play. I don't think Bird liked it too much.
so
Chart,
really,
you know.
what I wonder what maybe he didn't like the chart. Who's? Do you remember who wrote the chart?
Uh,
Was it Bill
I
Holman?
think, I think it was Bill Russo.
Oh, Bill Russo. That
He
could be
was,
a
he
reason.
was, yeah, he didn't write swinging like Bill Holman did. It was
No, he didn't.
a different kind of writing, you know.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I
So
remember.
I'm assuming maybe that was it. I don't know.
But now so on the band though, there were only 2 alto players in the regular band, right? So it was Schildkraut and Charlie or something, and the other guy. I mean, then the third.
Lee Konitz was featured, Bird was featured, and Charlie and Dave were in the band.
I see.
Okay.
That's how you got the 4 altos, you know.
That's how you got the 4 altos. So, boy, Charlie and Dave by themselves would have been something.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about? Well, let's talk about some of those guys individually. I wanted to, just I got to know. I have my own stories with both of those guys, with Charlie and Dave, which I won't get into now. But I'd like to know any kind of particular memories you might have of either of those guys. Let's say to narrow it down independently.
Well, I don't remember them hanging too much together, but Charlie Mariano was a roommate of mine, and I used to have long conversations on the bus with Dave because he was a family man and he didn't really want to be on the road as well as he played. That's why he never got into a higher status as far as popularity concerned and all that. So, but he told me some wild things about music that stuck with me. I listened to those guys whenever they were talking because I certainly learned a lot from just being around them.
Do you remember anything? I mean, specific that Dave might have, told you about something that pulled your coat to something that was profound?
No, I don't remember anything that specifically. He was always talking serious about music to me, which I really dug because, I mean, stories are one thing, but to get knowledge from somebody like him, it was great,
Yeah, it's funny though. I have the same feeling as I get older. I remember the feeling of what somebody told me. I might remember 1 or 2 specific things that somebody said to me, but it all becomes like a feeling of what it was
Sure.
like to hang with them, right? It's sort of like that.
Well, it adds to my passion has always been, when I heard Burton Diz, bebop was my passion. So, that was it, man. I listened to all those guys and I remember what they were talking about the music, mainly,
Yeah. And did you get to hear Fats Navarro quite a bit live, or some a few times at least?
I didn't hear them in Toronto, no.
No, I don't mean Toronto. I mean Fats Navarro.
Oh, Fats, I never heard Fats in person, which I'm very sorry to say because he was one of my favorites, but I never got to hear him in person.
Uh, yeah, I was just curious about that. And now, when you left Buffalo, I mean, did you have a? First of all, there's such a scene in Buffalo. All these cats that mostly Italian Americans that came from there, but just a list of saxophone players from the upstate region. I mean, Joe Romano, Sal Nistico, J.R. Montrose, Don Menza, Nick Brignola, and I'm probably leaving out a few other great players.
Yeah.
The drummers like Vinny Ruggieri and some cats like that. So, are these the people that you kind of came up with, or you were a couple years older, or can you tell me about that? Like that scene, like. Uh,
I think it's pretty much a coincidence that there were so many Italian Americans, but we were all pretty much connected. It was short drives and only about a little over an hour to Rochester. So we used to go there and play with those guys, and they'd come to Buffalo and play with us.
who were these
So,
people?
pardon?
Who did you mention? I just didn't get the names.
Well, there was Joe Romano was the main guy in there, and the main Jonies were there, Chuck and Gap and those guys. And Sal used to come in from Syracuse. It was Fats Wilson, a drummer from Syracuse, who was a monster man, great drummer. He ended up in New York playing, but he died young. He was way overweight, and he had a hemorrhage and died, which was early 20s,
And he
which is
didn't
a shame.
record.
Fats Wilson, yeah, was great drummer. So there was a lot of guys from that area. Somehow they called it the Upstate Burn because we all seemed to approach the music with the same kind of energy,
Yeah, there was something in common. Like different regions. There was Detroit. There was Chicago. There were things, and there was that upstate feeling. I think a
Yeah,
lot of those cats shared some kind of. I almost thought I used to think of it as an operatic quality in the
yeah.
saxophone player's sounds. There was a certain uh, feeling because Sal and I were pretty close. I got to know him a lot better than of all the people in that particular crowd. I think he was the person I was closest to.
But
But
Detroit had a thing going too. With a lot of players from Detroit that were all kind of in the same vein, the way they approached the music, So I think that that had a lot to do with it, being in a certain area when the thing was popular to play jazz. All the young players who were just getting into jazz, In Detroit, they had all the black guys who were great, and Rosalino and Art Pepper, and not Art Pepper, Pepper Adams, and all those guys,
and Billy Mitchell and
Yeah,
Thad and the Jones brothers, and I mean that Hank,
yeah,
and,
yeah,
and
yeah.
So
yeah,
Sam, what, when you're talking about this stuff, was this before, like, are you talking your late teenage years, early 20s, before you went with Kenton, or after, or during your time with Kenton? So like, are we talking
I, I
late
couldn't,
20s, or are we talking later? Like, just in terms of where you were doing things in upstate, say with Joe Romano or Don Menza.
well, that was my late teens.
Okay,
So that was in the late 40s.
So you guys were already very active around Buffalo or upstate, like Rochester, Syracuse.
Yeah.
those-
Well, Joe, most of those guys were a couple of years my junior, but they used to come to Buffalo to hear us, and we used to go in there and to sit in with them and whatever, you know. So yeah, that was in the late 40s.
Okay,
That's
Was
before I
J.R.
got Manta, yeah.
So J.R. Montrose was around there too.
Who?
J.R. Montrose.
Yeah. He was from Albany, I think.
Uh-huh.
Albany, New York, yeah.
Roy McCurdy too, right, from Rochester, or no? The drummer?
Roy McCurdy, yeah.
Yeah.
And so was Ron Carter,
Ron Carter, right?
the bass player, yeah.
Well, I remember the first record that I heard Sal Nistico on was a record, the Jazz Brothers record with the Mangionis, and
Yeah.
Roy McCurdy was on drums on that. I remember that's the first time I heard both of those people, and I remember I used to like a solo Sal played on Secret Love when I was about 16. I bought that, and I read that he wasn't that much older when he did that, so it set a benchmark, to get to. So when you left upstate New York, did you go right to California? What's the chronology of your particular movements at that time? What'd you do? When did you
Well,
leave, and when did where did you go?
I was on the road a few times before that, before I went with Kenton. And they were all commercial bands. There were no jazz bands. So I was back in Buffalo in 1953 and was ironically practicing my trumpet when the phone rang. And I picked up and I said, hello. And they said, is this Sam Noto, the trumpet player? I said, yes. They said, well, this is Stan Kenton. I said, yeah, goodbye. Boom, and I hung up.
Because you
So
didn't believe it, or because you knew a reputation, or what? Why did you like
I
it?
didn't believe Stan Kenton would be calling me, you know? So anyway, I found out he called me back. The bus had a bus accident coming to Buffalo. So Connie Condoli and another trumpet player were injured in the bus. So he needed two trumpet players when he got to Buffalo. So he called the union, and I knew the guy at the union. He knew I could play a high note, you know. So he told Stan Kenton to call me, and that's why he called me. And I went that night and I played the concert with the band. I had a talkover rehearsal at 6 o'clock, and then the concert was at 8 o'clock. And after the concert was over, Buddy Childers was the first trumpet player. Stan Kenton said, how did Sam do? He said, he did good. He read the charts and all that. So he come up to me, he says, so Conti is hung up. He says, can you come out on the road for 3 weeks until he's better? I said, sure. So I left on the next morning on the bus. And once I was on the band for 3 weeks, and then Conti didn't want to come back. He stayed in California. So I stayed on the band. That's how I got on the band. Kind of strange, but that's it.
Well, that's fate. But how long did you end up on that band, actually? Or how?
Well, off and on, I was off a couple of tours. From 53 to 1960, I did the last tour. So 7 years.
Wow, off and on. I mean, you'd go and you'd do other things and come back.
Yeah.
Or
And,
you would,
I mean, I learned a lot, but, I wasn't all that hipped up about my own playing. I just could read well, and I could read, and I got a pretty good sound on the trumpet, so that's why they had me there. He didn't know I could play jazz until he heard me after one of the concerts in Cincinnati. I went and sit in with the Cincinnati guys, and he was in the audience, and he calls me over and says, I didn't know you can play jazz. I said, well, Stan, I don't walk around saying I can play jazz. I can play jazz. I didn't do it. So he started giving me some solos.
And so you were on the band a few years before that happened, or because you were playing lead trumpet, right, or split lead? You were
Yeah,
playing.
he found out later,
Uh-huh.
So it just all developed, and I started playing the fifth trumpet, and I ended up, when Buddy left, Chillers, I ended up, Ed Letty left, Al Pacino left, and I ended up playing first trumpet.
Oh, and you're on a bunch of those records too, right? You did.
Yeah, I played lead on a couple of albums along with jazz, So yeah, they wanted me to be a lead trumpet player, but I wanted to be a jazz player. So I did have the facility to do the lead, and I did it for as long as I wanted to. And then I switched over and wouldn't take them jobs anymore. I just wanted to play jazz. And that's why I'm a poor man today.
I understand. Yeah, that's a friend of mine says that it's funny. He says he played jazz because he hates crowds.
Right.
And well, other cats. I just wanted to know, that I'm sure so many people pass through Kenton's band, and I want to get into a little bit about. He had a very unusual personality. There were some interviews I read with him, which were it's very nice that he stood up for the white jazz musician, who sometimes had a bit of a problem with what they called Crow Jim, especially among the jazz critics who didn't want to acknowledge that there were guys like you and Zoot and Schildkraut and Konitz and people that were playing Richie Kamuka that were, but I mean, Ken like really took it to the edge. A couple of times I read interviews and it sounded like, this cat could be like in the John Birch Society or something. It was very, almost to the point of, what was his particular personality? I know some cats used to call him Can't Stand Him as a joke, like Stan Kenton, kind of a pun on his name. But what was your relationship with him like, and how did you perceive him to be as a being?
You're talking about Stan now, right?
Yeah, about him himself. Yeah.
Well, I liked working for him, and he always treated the musicians very well. And he always told the musicians what a pleasure it was to have them on his band. So he was a psychologist, and he got the best music out of some players who were at the time pretty mediocre. So I mean, he knew what he was doing, and he was, like I say, I dug working for him. I worked for a lot of other people and didn't have that much fun, but I dug working for Count Basie. He was the greatest.
Oh, you got to tell me about that. That must have been.
Something, man. That was a real treat. And I was on Woody's band, but Woody's band was having tax troubles. Woody was, and we were just doing dance gigs. We weren't playing any jazz. It was just a dance band,
That's hard to imagine.
Yeah, and Sal wasn't on the band yet. When I left the band, Sal Nestico went on the band, and Bill Chase and all those guys, and the band took off and really got hot again,
Jake Hanna, Phil Wilson,
Yeah,
those guys,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Phil Wilson was
That was
something
good.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was that was so before then Woody had tax problems, because I know he had tax problems in his later life. There was really some kind of one of his manager or something had really done some terrible financial things to him.
Yeah, he was in a lot of financial trouble. And he and I didn't get along too good for some reason. But we got to be friends when he came. We both ended up in a club in Toronto as guests, listening to Zoot Sims. And we drank together and got drunk together, Woody and I, and we got to be friends.
Oh, well, Zoot could facilitate
Yeah.
that kind of thing. I knew Zoot pretty well, and Zoot's music just fostered cheer. There was something about a feeling that would take over. I mean, did you feel that too with Zoot? There was just some kind of magnanimity to it, a magnanimous quality in it that just made you want to have a good time. And befriend the world. I just felt
Yeah,
he had that. Did you
yeah.
get to know Zoot? Was Zoot on the Kenton band with you too, or
Who?
Zoot Sims?
So somebody, he was on Kenton's band when I was on.
Right.
And Lee Conus, all those. I went on that all-star band. There was a lot of guys on that band, good players.
So
And Zoot was in the drug problem. Had a drug problem, and you couldn't get too close to him unless he was feeling pretty good. If he was
at that time.
hurting, it wasn't fun to be around.
Ah.
Like a lot of guys we know.
Yeah, I didn't know him in that. I knew him when he was drinking a lot, and he was a very fun drunk.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, he was a
yeah,
cheerful, basically a good-natured drinker.
yeah,
And I think he dabbled occasionally in some things. I know he liked some blow, some and all that, but I didn't know him in his heroin period, so maybe that's a different thing.
Well, he ended up just mainly drinking. That was his demise, because he had a bad liver, and doctors told him to not drink anymore. And he did stop for a while, and then he went right back in, and that's when he cacked.
I know. One night I sat in with him. He was playing on a boat on one of those one night cruise in Boston. I was up there on the Charles, and Joe brought me up there. It was one of the last times I saw Zoot. He was not feeling, he had been diagnosed, and he was sitting there sipping white wine, which he didn't used to drink. I never knew him as a wine drinker. He was a
Yeah.
whiskey man. And I came on the boat and I sat in with him and Al, and Zoot kept buying me drinks. He said, "Listen, man, tonight, whatever you want is on me." I said, "Really?" I said, "Thank you." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, the doctor told me that I really can't drink anymore, and I don't know what to do with all this money in my pocket, so I want to live vicariously through you tonight. I'm going to live vicariously through you."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay." And
That's
then
good.
that's another story. But that's Richie Kamuka. Uh, did you get some Richie Kamuka and Stan Levy are two people that come to mind about that Kenton period.
Yeah.
Uh,
Richie wasn't on the band when I was on the band. Stan was, so Stan Levy. But Richie, I just met Richie later in life, not on the band.
because you stayed out in California. Now, when you kind of after this period in the early '50s with Kenton,
Yeah,
then
I stayed out there at the Balboa Ballroom. We were going to stay there 9 months a year and then travel for a couple of months, and then it was going to be it. So I moved out there. I had the one child, Michael, and my wife and I, and Michael moved to California. But we ended up playing one night a week at the Balboa Ballroom, and finally we just collapsed, because Stan had a dream about that place that's where he got started with all that, in Balboa, California, which is a beautiful place.
So when did you move there then, Sam? What year?
That was 1958. And then I left California. I didn't stay there because I was living in Balboa and I wasn't nowhere. It was a 50-mile drive up to LA to where all the stuff was happening. So we just jumped in my Volkswagen and went back to Buffalo. I started a jazz band there in Buffalo with Wade Legge on piano. You ever heard of him?
Wade Legge, sure.
Yeah.
Great player.
I
Great
think he
player.
replaced Richie Powell in the Max Roach Clifford Brown band
Yeah,
for a while. He died young too, didn't he?
yeah, yeah. He had bleeding ulcers, and he was when he would drink scotch with milk. He was trying
Oh,
to beat the ulcers and still stay high.
That was,
Yeah.
Scotch with milk. It was funny. Lockjaw used to drink Scotch with milk, and somebody said Bird also liked Scotch with milk. And there was a myth, I think, that the milk would,
Yeah.
make it less would do something that the alcohol wouldn't hurt you as much. And actually, it was the reverse of that. That the milk activated the alcohol to.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't sound too appetizing anyway.
It's not bad. I tried it.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a chaser, yeah. Scotch neat, milk chaser. So you back to Buffalo, like 58, 59-ish in there, and so you're working around town. When did you open your first club there? Was that later? That's like mid-60s? Renaissance?
Where did I open where?
You opened your club. You had a thing with Joe Romano where you were working steady in Buffalo, right? Was that later? Like 65-ish or
That was later. I bought a club in what it was 66, I think.
right?
It was a coffee house. We bought it, 4 people, and we put $250 each. We bought it for $1,000. And we had a whole building, a little building, and the rent was $45 a month. And it was in the downtown area, man.
Wow.
So we stayed open for a year, Joe Romano and I, and that quintet there. And we were open from 10 to 2, had an hour off, then we worked from 3 to 6. And all the people from the bars used to come there and have breakfast. And it was waiting in line to get in, man. It was weird. It's great. And then I had the second club, which I had, and that was 83, 82 or 3. And I had Chet Baker and all those guys in there. Chet and Sal Nisico had that band in my place, Renaissance 2, it was called. And I had some good people in there, Al Cohen, and but nobody came there. It was in a bad area. So nobody came there. So I screwed up anyway.
I think I almost played that club with Chet. Did Pat LaBarbera end up doing that gig with Chet?
Where?
I think, did he have was it Pat LaBarbera?
Sal. They did a
With
record.
Sal?
They did it with Sal. There was Lorne Lofsky on guitar. Chris,
Yeah, he had.
who was playing drums?
Art Frank?
Frank, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they did a record, like a CD from the club at the Renaissance with Chet, right? They
Yeah,
released.
that's the one with Sal and Lauren Lofsky.
Yeah,
Lauren Lofsky and Chris Connor,
Chris Connor and Art Frank, correct?
bass player, and Art Frank. Yeah.
Yeah. That was around 82 or 83, I think. You had just moved to Fort Erie at that time, right? Or did you not? Like you left Toronto around that time, early 80s, right? 81?
Yeah,
Had you been living in Toronto before then?
I lived in Toronto before that, and then I moved back down to Buffalo where I was going to have the club. But like I say, it didn't work out. And then I went back up to Toronto and stayed there until I moved to Fort Erie in 1988. And I used to commute to Toronto and all that. And I used to work some in Buffalo because it was right across the bridge there, Fort Erie, So that just a kind of rough part of my life then. I didn't know where the hell I was going.
Is that when you ended up in Vegas?
And no, I ended up in Vegas way before that.
That was before that.
That's before Toronto. Yeah, I was there from 1968 to 75 in Vegas, working the show bands, which was driving me crazy.
I was going to ask that. I said, how did that affect your spirits?
Yeah, I didn't I was drinking like a fool. I was a heavy drinking to keep me through all that.
I
But
can
yeah,
imagine. Yeah, it would be. I ran into Moody. Was Moody down there for a
I
period?
was on, I was on the band at the Hilton with Moody. Moody was on the band.
Right, because he had a funny thing to say. I was talking to him several years ago, and I said, man, so you were in Vegas for a few years. He said, yeah. He said, I did some time there. I said, why'd you do that? What made you do that? And he said, well, I was married, and my wife um, told me that, look, if you want this marriage to last, you got to get off the road. So I said goodbye to Dizzy. I said, I'm going to settle down, and the place I could work steady was Vegas. So I did it, and this and that. And I said, oh, huh. Well, now you're back on the scene. You're playing jazz again. What prompted that? He said, oh, I got divorced.
Perfect. uh,
And so when you couldn't take Las Vegas anymore, that's when you headed back east. Is that what happened after that?
that's when I came to Toronto. I went to Toronto to play 2 weeks at the Bourbon Street, the jazz club. And then I saw Guido Basso, who he and I were on Louis Beltz's band together. And he said, Sam, you ought to come here. So I thought about it and I talked to my family, and we moved to Canada. And I got into some studio stuff, jingles and TV shows and shit like that. And then I got on Rob McConnell's band, the Boss Brass, which is a pretty good band.
It was a good band. Yeah.
So, and that's when I went to Toronto after Vegas. Yeah.
And you never, I mean, I guess because you were a family man, it didn't occur to you that New York City would be a place to, it seemed like you were in LA and the other center seemed to be New York, Manhattan, but it never appealed to you, uh,
Yeah. I moved there myself, and I was going to move the family. I ended up playing at the Showboat. Is it the Showboat? To Las Vegas type place, and I was starting to get a few jingles and stuff like that. But my wife, I took her there for a couple of weeks. She couldn't stand it. She couldn't hack New York at all.
uh-huh.
So we decided not to make that move.
Because I wondered, like you were, I know there's several players, like Ira Sullivan had the same problem. His wife didn't really want to live in New York and he
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah, she didn't hack it at all, man.
Yeah, the vibe was too much. But can we talk a little bit about, I know that you recently lost your wife and you were really close to her, and it's a kind of a very private area. But I was just, I know that, you're one of the cats I know that had a long and it seemed to be a very happy marriage. And it's so hard to do in the profession that we've chosen. I mean, Kirk has
Yeah.
also succeeded to have a long relationship that's worked with one woman. Um, like, how did you meet your wife? And what can you say a few things about her? Just
Well, she was only 16 when I met her, and I was 20, and that's when we started having a relationship. And so I told her when she got real serious. I says, well, you're gonna have to know one thing. I'm gonna be a musician. I am a musician, and I can't see me doing anything else. Oh, she said, well, that's fine. So she stuck with me throughout all the moves, and I moved around a lot, man. I had to go where the work was, if I wanted to play the trumpet. I mean, most of the time there wasn't the music I wanted to play, but at least I was playing the trumpet and I was making decent money. In Vegas, I was making decent money, and on the road, I was making decent money. Every time I went back to Buffalo, I went right back in the same doldrums. So I had to keep moving in order to keep what I wanted to do up. to what I wanted to do. And she stuck with me all the while, and that's it. She never was one for split ups and divorces and that. She was a pretty devout Catholic, she didn't believe in that. So she went through a lot, I'm sure.
And Kirk mentioned that you told him a story once about how much she loved. Go ahead.
Well, Sam, I remember one time you were telling me. Now I don't know if this was your first date with Arlene or when you were just first met her or something. You talked about going somewhere in a cab where all of us she was singing like a bebop head under her breath that you sort of heard her singing that. You go, what's that? Oh, nothing. Never mind. You wouldn't. Do you remember that story?
Well, after we left the Crystal Beach where the ballroom was there, we went to hear some dance band. And then we went back to Buffalo because Crystal Beach is right across the bridge in Canada. So we went to a friend of mine, Mouse Benatti, a great alto player. Did you ever hear of him, Bob? Benatti, Mouse Benatti?
No, I didn't know him.
Well, he was from Buffalo, but
Yeah.
a fantastic alto player.
Great
Wow.
player.
He was playing in Buffalo, so I told her, I said, well, I'm going to a jazz club, so here's some money, take a cab home. She says, no, I want to come with you. I said, oh, okay. So we're in the cab going to the club, and she's singing ornithology. She's humming ornithology. I'm saying, what are you humming there? She says, oh, you wouldn't know. I said, I wouldn't know. I said, that's Charlie Parker's ornithology. She says, oh, yeah, I got all his records, she says. So we went in there and Mouse blew her away, man. She weeped out. And she loved the way Mouse played because Mouse was a really fantastic player, man.
Mouse Spinati.
Yeah, he ended up in New Orleans and got a heavy drug problem, and then I met him back in Vegas. I went up to Tahoe, and he was living in Tahoe. He was cleaned up and everything, and I told him I was living in Vegas, so he came down to Vegas, and we got on the same gig together. We worked together for 2 years, playing Minsky's Burlesque Review. But we had a great band. It was all beboppers in the band. It was on by Carl Saunders. We had Mouse, trombone player, Eddie Morgan from Cincinnati. Winnie Manone's son, Jimmy Manone on drums. We had a great band, man. And it was fun. The gig was fun. So, and then Mouse and I played some jazz gigs together in Vegas.
And Mouse never recorded, did he?
So there's a bootleg out that Mouse and I are on, yeah.
I'd love to hear it. I mean,
I heard that, Sam. Did you post some of that online? I heard it's like it's burning. It's from Vegas, right in the 70s. Is it early 70s or something? Mid 70s. There's like a quintet thing with you and him. I had never heard of him before either, and I heard this, and it was fantastic.
I don't remember.
Okay. Anyway, I thought I might have heard it from you somehow, whether you posted it online or anyway, it's great. You're playing some up-tempo stuff on that with Mouse Benatti, right?
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Really great.
Yeah.
there was another trumpet player from upstate. He's on one of Sal Nistico's early records, and he sounds quite nice. His name was Salamico.
Salamico, yeah, he was from Albany too. Yeah, I knew Sal. Yeah.
You know what happened to him? Was he?
He just never. He just stayed in Albany and he just worked around there. You know, he didn't do any. He recorded a couple of things early, but then after that, he just kind of nobody heard about him anymore. You know.
You made a record. I mean, we both actually recorded for Xanadu, for Don Schlitten.
Yeah.
Um, there's one record where I don't remember if it's. I think it's McPherson's record, and you're on it, where you play that Kenny Drew Bobby da ba doo be da ba doo be da context. I think they call it on that. It was
Yeah.
originally called something different when Jackie McLean recorded it, and Jack Sheldon, I think, did a record of it. And it was a nice record with you and McPherson. I thought that was a nice.
Yeah, that was a Drew's album. So I
That was
went
Kenny
out there
Drew's record,
I
right?
went out there to do my album with the Xanadu in California. The one I did with Sam Most at the flute and the trumpet, and
He's great.
he put me on that album with Drew. And there was Leroy Vinegar, Frank Butler. I loved the way Frank Butler played, man, the drummer.
Oh yeah, he was a great
He
player.
was
Wasn't
a nice man. The guy was always up your can, you know.
he? Yeah, I have a nice Hampton Hawes record, which features him and Scott LaFaro, and that's very nice. And Harold Land. I think it's you know that one is called oh, what is it? For Real.
Oh yeah,
And Frank Butler, uh, everything I ever heard him on, he sounds great. He's got his own way of playing too. And so you got to play quite a bit with Frank Butler.
yeah. Well, you know what? I remember reading a thing that Stan Getz said. If you want to get better, you're going to have to play with better people. And that's what I found out as I went through my whole system there, that the better the people I played with were, the better I seemed to play, you know? And it kind of rubs off if the thing is working.
Yeah,
I remember saying that, yeah.
that's a good point. You know, I mean, Art Farmer put it another way. He said once, he said, if you find that you're the smartest cat in the room, you better find another room.
Yeah.
But Sam, you did a number of other records for Xanadu, right? You did a number under your own name.
And I did, I think 4 under my own name, and then I'm on several other ones. Well, you know, that I was a sideman on. I did the ones with Blue Mitchell, Al Cohen, and Dexter.
Dexter, yeah.
That was done on in New York, and we didn't know what we were playing. He just called me in Toronto and said, "Come to New York." I said, "What's up?" He says, "No, just come to New York and come to such and such a studio." So I walked in the studio. I didn't know where I was going, and I see Blue Mitchell in there. He's warming up, and I said, "Hey, man, Blue, hey." I says, "I think I'm in the wrong room here." So the boys came out of the sound booth. "No, you're in the right room, Sam." So, and then I see Dexter Gordon walking in with the entourage. He had Nika with him, you know, the princess, and Al Cohen, and it was like the 2 tenors and the 2 trumpet things, you know. And we didn't know what we were playing. We're just making it up. I told him, let's play. I don't know. I just blurted it out. I said, let's play Half Nelson. Blue and I will play Half Nelson, and the 2 tenors play
Lady Bird.
the other name for the 2.
Yeah, Lady Bird, right.
Lady Bird. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like that was it, man. It came off great. We had no music or nothing. We just played at the top of our heads. You know? It's fantastic. That's what I played better sometimes when I'm playing with guys like that. I end up playing better. So
Yeah,
it works that way, you know?
it does. You know, and the one good thing about Don Schlitten recording for Don that was good was that he really stayed out of your way.
Yeah.
In all the 2 records I made for him, he made one suggestion. When I was doing my trio record with Rufus Reed and Bobby Ward, wonderful drummer from Boston, Don said, I'd love to hear you guys play Poinciana. And that was the only thing that he ever did the whole date. He just sat there, let us play. And, if we wanted to do another take, we did it. If we didn't think we needed another take, we didn't do it. He really just, it's a perfect record producer. Just let us handle it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very good.
Well, on the first album I did for him, he only made one suggestion also. The tune I played, I had a different name for, which I even forgot now. But when he heard that tune, he said, "Do you mind if I change the name of that tune to Entrance?" It says, "Because I want to name the record Entrance." So it was named the album Entrance. It was my first jazz album alone as a leader, and that was it. It was a quartet. So that's the only thing he said to me. I call all my own tunes and everything.
Yeah, that was.
Sam, how old were you when you did your first leader recording?
How long?
How old were you when you did your first, you did that particular record for Don Schlitz?
How long did it take?
No, how old were you? Like you'd been on the scene a long time.
My first record as a jazz leader on that was I was 34 when I recorded it, and then it came out in 1975. It came out, so I was 35 then.
So it had been sitting in the can for a long time.
Yeah.
Wow.
For about a year, not quite a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were like 34 before you even recorded as a leader, really?
Yeah. The rest of the time was and mostly big band records.
Right.
That I was on.
And so over the years, you've done some writing. Like I know that we did a record of a bunch of your tunes, probably, I don't know, 20 years ago when we went into Charlie Ringus's place. You had a bunch of tunes for that, but you've recorded a lot of your own tunes.
Yeah.
And also I remember I was in Buffalo. I saw you about 2 months back or so when I was in Buffalo. And you also have some big band music that you've arranged, right?
Yeah, but it's not been recorded. Some of it was recorded in Vegas, but I don't think it was ever released. They had all the ringers they brought in. Carl Saunders, again, Carl Fontana, and a bunch of guys came in to do that album.
So so it never came out, but you have personal recordings of.
It never came out because it never was finished. We only did one session, and we only had a couple of things recorded. And the trumpet player moved out of Vegas, and that was it. He was a guy putting the money out for it and all that, a young trumpet player who was interested in the writing and the charts and that. Hey, I gotta leave you for 2 minutes. Do you mind?
No.
I think we're almost ready to wrap up. Even
I'll be right.
Go
back.
ahead, Ted. Stop the recording for a moment here.
Yeah, we can.
As James Mooney used to say, "I'll be white black."
I'll be white black. That's right. So. Okay, wait. I don't know how to close the recording. And then we'll say our goodbyes. Full Sam, informative and great to talk to you and to see you, still, that you're doing so well, and that's just a blessing. And just to finish things up though, let's say you've seen so many changes in the world and in, let's say, more specifically, the musical world, and people are always saying, well, jazz is dead, and Somebody says, no, it's not dead, it's just breathing hard. And, you know, Bill Crow said something recently like, you know, the jazz is like chess. I mean, even though maybe it's not as popular, it's not as popular thing since computers took over everything and everything. There's always going to be somebody who wants to play the game. But you know, if you were to, let's say, to advise any young musicians, I'm trying not to be too corny with this, but the idea is to, uh, in this day and age, you know, with the differences between the way you came up, um, what advice would you have for somebody who was passionate about music and was thinking about, especially more specifically, to play jazz? Anything you might think of to tell them?
Well, it's kind of hard because I mean, I had a passion. I don't know. It was I had to do it, and I don't know why, but I had to do it.
Can we see your
And
face better, Sam? I'm sorry. Just
I think that the young musicians have to feel somewhat like that in order to do it, and you have to stay at it. You're not going to be a star overnight or never, maybe never. And they can learn the music, you know, from a school and all that, but if you don't have the passion, I mean, you're barking up the wrong tree, I think. I mean, in order to make any kind of a statement in jazz, you got to have a passion for it, I think. And you don't have to sound like anybody. You just got to have a passion for it. And I think the young musicians, if they don't really have that passion, they can make a living doing music, but they'll have to do something else because it's hard enough to play jazz when you got a passion.
yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, you know, the era that you came up, I mean, I came up and Kirk too, sort of just at the tail end of the time when there were all these wonderful, great players, walking around the earth and that had this passion. And I'm sure there's passion still out there to some extent, but I think that what you're talking about, you know, the Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and even the Dexter Gordons and Blue Mitchells and Frank Butlers and the people we've been talking about, you know, there was just the passion was kind of contagious, right? I mean, you know, I think you were surrounded by passionate people and some who played better than you did, you know, to bring you up to their level and everything. And um, you know, I'm glad that you were so fortunate as to
Yeah.
have experienced that.
Yeah, I think the whole work scene is, like when, for instance, I used to go out to hear Sam when long before I knew him, and Sam said the first time he came up, it was like a 2-week engagement at Bourbon Street. Now, Bob, I don't think you were in Toronto in those years when that club was happening, or maybe you
No,
got.
I just missed that.
But I moved to Toronto in 1977, and all the clubs were week-long gigs, like 6-night gigs, some of them for 2 weeks, and all these people came through town. And that's the first time I heard Sam was at maybe George's Spaghetti House or Bourbon Street, and those were long-running gigs. So there was a scene, and I'm sure your years in New York, Bob, similar. You know,
Yeah, I didn't get to Toronto
gigs.
uh, in about 1985. I played. Dave Kaplan booked me at a place called East 85th Street,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
and I was amazed at the rhythm section. They got me Bernie Sinensky, Neil. I'm sorry, Kieran Overs, Bernie Sinensky, and Jerry Fuller.
Yeah.
And I said, "Wow, these guys are like as good as New York guys." You know, it was like wonderful. You know, I had a beautiful week up there with those cats. And
Yeah.
then, you know,
85th. Well, Sam and I worked there together. I think that's the first time I worked a week with you, Sam, was there, 1985 or something like that. And that was a nice club, but they've kind of come and gone. But just to be out doing things with the same people over a longer period of time is something that Sam's generation certainly had coming up playing all the time. And Bob, you're a bit older than me, so I think, that was there. It was there for me too, and the sort of the maybe the absolute tail end of that, and then things kind of changed over the last number of years. But
Well, Sam certainly was an inspiration to me. I used to love when you guys would play, even at the Rex Hotel. I had some nice moments in Toronto, coming and sitting in with you guys playing the last set, and I had a nice recording. Sam and I did one with Bernie Sinensky together that just came out this year.
I know, I heard that. It sounded beautiful. It was great.
And
it's yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it funny, Sam? I mean, the things that you flagellated yourself over earlier, like I finished that date and I said, well, Sam sounds good, everybody sounds good, and I didn't like what I played. I was like, oh no, and then I heard it like 40 years later or 30 years later, however long it was that we did it, and I say, that's not half bad. There's really some nice moments there.
That's good, man. You sound good on that. You kidding? That's good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, we sound good, but at the time I was just so self-critical that I didn't want to hear it. It was like, but I think personally, as I get older and I listen to some of these things, fortunately, everybody who made that record that we did, Sam, is still on the planet. So fortunately, and that's one of the few records I have where I don't look back now and I say, I better cherish the moments that I had there, because that's documented and I'm never going to play with those people again.
Yeah.
So, so it takes on another significance, I think.
I think that's something we all like. The longer we're in the game, and I'm the youngest of all of us, but the longer we're in the game, the more that becomes a part of our life, our musical life, professional life, whatever. It's like you say, okay, I played with so and so for 15 years, 20 years, but that's not going to happen anymore.
So you just you cherish the moments you had. Like I just read this little thing by a Buddhist monk that said one way to be happy in life is like, if you've ever had a toothache, just remember having had the toothache and how good it feels to not have the toothache. So I think of that, personally, like last year I had to spend 4 months in the hospital with this whole having a tracheostomy and all this kind of thing, and I was flat on my back, and so I mean, every day I just thank the Lord that it feels so great to not be in a hospital.
Yeah.
That I start out from that point of view, and nothing depresses me, hardly anything. So I think that that's something we should think about. And Sam's maintained this incredible optimism. That's another thing that I admire about you, Sam, and that's kept you going, for so long. I mean, you always you were cynical, and you've cracked me up sometimes with your acerbic humor. But nevertheless, I never felt that you were, like we've both known people, well, all three of us have known cats that were like so negative that, you talk to them for half an hour and you want to slit your wrists, It was like, just, wow, like, is life that bad? And
that's the way to keep myself sane.
What's that, Sam?
I said, that's how I keep myself sane.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've done a good job of it and set a good example for those of us that aspire to get to, to where you're going. I mean, cats like you and Bill Crow, Ted Brown, that's one of the reasons we're doing this show, too, to show how creative spirits and creative people, it doesn't end. No. Even when you're not playing your horn every day anymore, there's still a process that's going on.
Yeah. Well, in being in the business we were, we met a lot of nice people, man. And all the great musicians were some nice people. And I don't think we'd have that opportunity if we did anything else,
Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful to be a musician and to be involved in it. I mean, the amount of wonderful people and truly creative spirits, and a few geniuses along the way.
Yeah.
On that note, I'd like to thank both of you cats for joining me today in this, and I'd like to thank Jessy Kaiser for helping keep this thing on track.
You're welcome, Bob.
And,
My
Sam,
honor and my pleasure.
oh good. And Sam, you know we love you, and I really appreciate your doing this, and I hope that this helps you get out in the world, and the people will check out the records you made. I don't know if your records on Xanadu became CDs. Mine didn't, but um, Don was a beautiful cat. Is a beautiful person. Don Schlitten,
Yeah.
the producer and owner of Xanadu, but he was, he never really had the funds to promote us the way he wanted to.
No, he sold it all to Japanese people, you know.
Right. That's
So he sold the whole thing. So they keep it going. And I mean, he wanted to retire. He didn't want to be into it anymore, you know.
yeah. He just wants to stay in Riverdale,
Yeah.
but
Well,
he'd be
listen, hey,
coming.
it was great talking to you guys. I love you guys, and keep blowing, man, as long as we can, right?
That's it. And
I got to wait 2 more weeks to get my upper plate. I haven't played my trumpet sitting in the corner here for like 6 weeks now. It's driving me crazy. So in 2 weeks, I'll have my upper plate, a new one, and I'm gonna be blowing that friggin' thing again.
Well, we can't wait, man. It'll be great to hear you again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks everyone. Sam, it's so great to see you and talk to you. You've been an inspiration for a long time. I got to thank you for all the music that we've had to play together and just hearing you. Even
We
before
had some good time.
work with you. It's some
We
wonderful.
had some good times, Kirk.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And same here, Sam.
Thanks.
All right, so too, Bob. I'll talk to you guys again, huh?
Okay.
Yes.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you, dear. Bye.
Thank you. Well, this has been On the Real Side, and we hope to see you again soon. We've got some other wonderful guests. We'd like to, of course, thank the great Sam Noto for being with us once more, and also the wonderful Kirk MacDonald. And we'll see you again soon. This is presented by the Lower Manhattan Music Studio, the Bob Mover Academy, which is the jazz branch of that. And once again, thank you.